Hey sports card fans, it's John, Wade Boggs fan, back with another video. Hope you're all doing well. Today I thought I'd do a video on what I look for when buying vintage baseball cards. There's a lot more to consider when buying vintage baseball cards than modern baseball cards or sports cards in general. Today's sports cards, unless something's actually damaged in the packaging, you're probably going to pull a card that is fairly well centered, sharp corners, pretty good surface to them. Most often than not, you'll probably get a 9 or a 10 from a modern card. However, vintage cards are a lot different. You're talking about cards that are 30, 40, 50 plus years old. Back when they were originally pulled from packs, kids didn't really care about preserving the cards in their condition. They'd trade them, flip them, put them in shoe boxes, rubber bands, you name it. Condition really wasn't a concern because they weren't really collectibles back then. Plus, you have the issue of the printing technology back then. You could have a pack fresh card with sharp corners, nice surface, but could be way off center from the printing process. So I'm going to go over my main criteria in what I look for when buying vintage cards. Now, there could be others out there that have a different outlook in what they would prefer when looking for vintage cards. So again, there could be a differing of opinion, but I'm going to turn the camera around and show some examples from my collection that ones I'm really proud of in terms of the eye appeal that I'm looking for. Other ones in my collection that I have that if I had to do over again, maybe I wouldn't buy. So yeah, I'm going to turn the camera around and again, just discuss what I look for when I go to purchase some vintage baseball cards. All right, before I start showing off some of my cards and examples, generally speaking, when I look for vintage baseball cards, my main focus is the centering of the card. To me, the first thing that I notice on a card is whether it is really off center or not. It doesn't have to be perfect centering, but if it is way off center, when I look at a card, that's the first thing and really the main thing that I notice, and it takes away from my enjoyment from the card. The second thing that I probably look to then is the surface. Is there a snowing, a little bit of discoloration, especially over a player's face? Are there other like ink blotches or runs? You get that a lot with some 70s cards. 1978, for example, was really known for during the printing press. You get a lot of ink blotches, the black ink. Yeah, to me, it takes away from the card. Then probably third in importance are the corners. Now again, it depends upon what color the border of the card is and how it may affect the overall eye appeal. And probably last are the edges of the card. Now, with that said, there are some examples where I'm willing to overlook maybe centering just a little bit if there are other factors. Sometimes the surface may not be as bad. Corners I don't like. So again, it's not an absolute in my what I look for. But hopefully some of the examples that I show you here of ones that I feel are well suited for my collection, and again, other ones that I've purchased years ago that if I was focused on the type of cards that I want now, I most likely would not have purchased back then. Now, with this all said in terms of condition, my overall priority when looking at vintage cards is my budget. So I don't have unlimited funds. I don't have a lot of funds to buy high-end, high-graded vintage cards for the most part. So I'm looking in the mid-grade range, usually from like PSA 4s to 6s. And especially when you get in those 4 or 5s, there's going to be problems with the card. They're not going to be perfect. And so what I like to do is try to minimize the imperfections to where I still have a very nice eye appealing card, at least in my from my viewpoint. So here is one example. Again, it's just a random order here of ones that I like, and I'll tell you why. Other ones that I may not choose to have bought now versus later. But the first one here is my 1952 Topps Bob Feller. Now this is in a PSA 2. Now for 1952 Topps, there's generally a centering issue. Again, very early in Topps, they're really their second year. This is their main baseball card release, but they did have those playing cards in 51. So really their second year. Printing quality back in the 50s was such as they didn't worry too much about whether cards were perfectly centered off the press. So it's sometimes difficult to find a fairly well-centered 52 Topps. When I saw this card, a couple things had it going for me as to why I wanted this particular card in my collection. The centering overall is good. The second thing is the surface, the color. And now it's not perfect. Again, this is a 2, so I knew there was going to be some imperfections. If you see a little bit closely near his chin, okay, there's a little bit of snowing there going on, maybe a little bit of an ink, mark there. But overall, it's nothing that when I look at this card, I can enjoy the beauty of the card, and the little imperfections on the surface here do not bother me. As you can see, the corners and the edges, so there's an edge right there that it's sort of creased in, and those corners are definitely beat up. I don't know if I can get the camera there. Those corners and those edges, which is one of the main reasons why it was brought down to a 2. You can see there's a little crease in the corner. To me, when I look at that, I don't mind that corner wear or even some of the creasing because it is near the corner there. The back, again, I'm not so much concerned about the backs. Some of them, I don't know, again, it's just a hit or miss. If I see a card that is really nice on the front, but way off on the back, I may decide to pass on it. But overall, generally speaking, this is a fine enough back for me. All the information is there, fairly well centered. Again, doesn't have to be perfect on the back. So this is a good example of what I'm looking for, even though this card definitely has some imperfections. All right, the next one is another one that I picked up, the 1950 Bowman Yogi Berra. Now, the other difficulty is for, I guess, maybe a good number of these cards I bought off of eBay. And it's all depending upon the quality of the photos. You may not see creases or other imperfections just from photographs. It's a lot easier to hold the card in person. You get to check it in the light. You get to see maybe what makes, in this case, a 2, why this card is deserving of a 2, or maybe you think it's over or undergraded. Here, the first thing I saw was the centering on this card. Again, not perfect, but it is darn near close. The second is the surface itself. I've seen copies where the registration is off a little bit. This one doesn't seem to have that. Now, with that said, and the corners, for the most part, if you look at those corners, those seem really nice for a 2 compared to that Bob Feller. So I knew there had to be something in the listing, even though I couldn't quite tell what it was. And the picture of the back, and again here, it's maybe a little off center, but a clean back. So again, I knew there had to be something wrong with it, but overall what I saw, I was very pleased. And what is quote unquote wrong with it, you can see here, there's one major surface crease running through the card there. All right. And if you may be able to pick it up, there's a little one going through his helmet there. But when you look at the card, I mean, you have to look at it at a certain angle to see that imperfection. So even though there is a surface issue here, just sort of like that Bob Feller there to some extent. This is a card that I would buy every single time that I would see it, again, for the price that I was able to buy it for. Very pleased to have this one as a part of my collection. And the imperfections, some people say, I don't want any creases on my card. Well, if there were no creases on this card could very well be a 4 or 5 and way out of my price range. So again, it's taking everything into consideration, budget, knowing I can't get perfect cards, and being able to minimize the imperfections to where I see and still find enjoyment in looking at the card. This next one here, I bought several years ago. I think maybe it was the first national I attended in 2015. It was sort of an impulse buy. It was sort of the end of the day. I had some money to burn. I saw this card. It was in the price range of what money I had left. Again, overall, nice copy of this 53 Bowman. But as you can see, it's off-centered top to bottom. The back is off-centered, again, that top to bottom, but the back doesn't bother me at all. Would I think twice of buying this today? Possibly. It would depend on what price I could get it for. Generally speaking, if a card is going to be off-center, depending on the overall design of the card, I don't mind so much it being off-center top to bottom. And if it is, having a card like this where there's more border on the bottom than the top is more acceptable to me. It doesn't look... I can still enjoy this card. When I pick it up, I still look at the great image, the great color. This card has no creases. I think it's the corner wear and the off-centering. At least I can't tell any creases in the card. These Beckett holders I don't quite like. They're so thick. It doesn't feel like you're actually holding the card. Anyway, that's a whole nother video. So overall, I probably would buy this again. Again, based on the price. But if I saw one for a similar price that had a little bit better centering top to bottom, I probably would have gone or would go for that one. Here's another card that I've had in my collection for I don't know how long. I bet you it was 20 years. And I eventually had it graded by PSA just because it was a rookie card and I wanted to preserve it. So this was, even when I got it graded, was well before I really started focusing on, being on my Wade Boggs cards, on vintage baseball cards. And it's the 1957 Topps Frank Robinson rookie card. To me, again, the surface is nice. I don't believe there are really any surface creases. The back is acceptable. Again, you get a little off-center there, and it's because of the front. I probably, if I hadn't mentioned on for a 5, I would not buy this card again. This would be one that I can see later down the road, although prices for Frank Robinson's rookie cards, I'd almost have to afford a lesser grade, and then what am I going to have to deal with the condition? But the off-centering there, when I look at this card, I immediately see this off-center left to right. It takes away a little bit from the visual appeal of the card for me. Again, still happy to have a Frank Robinson rookie card. And to some, just having the card is enough, and that is fine. Hey, I'd rather have the card in any condition than not have it at all. And that's that's a good attitude to have for some. I want to be a little bit more selective for me, knowing that I can't afford this in a 7 or an 8. So I'm going to have to get something in a lower grade. But there are other 5s out there, I've seen them, that are a little bit, that are centered better and maybe have a little bit more issues with the corners, which I'm more able to or willing to accept. So that one there, maybe not the best example of what I'm looking for in my collection. But here's a good overall example. I've showed this off recently. I just absolutely love this card. So forgive me if you've been watching these videos. My 1969 Topps Tom Seaver. Now this is a 4, and everyone says, how can this be a 4? There are, a couple issues here, but with the white border, for me, it more readily accepts some corner wear without taking away the eye appeal of the card. And if you look here, I'll try to get it, zoom in close here. I'm not sure if it's going to do it. There are some issues on the corners. You maybe see it on the back more. There's a little bending of that corner there. There's another bend in that corner there, even though the corners themselves are sharp. There's some little crease there. And this mark back here, I've mentioned this before, this may have actually gotten a 6 with a stain, or a 5 with a stain, and dropped it down to a 4. The centering is pretty well. There's a little bit of a diamond cut, and in some of the 60s and definitely in the 70s, I've noticed, especially like 1975, a lot of diamond centering. That turns me off as well. But overall, even though there is some slight diamond centering going on, it is minor. And the surface, there are no creases to this thing. And the color is good, so you got pretty good centering, nice color, that surface. So the things that take away from this are the corners, which again, unless you look really closely, you can't really see the imperfections, and possibly a little stain on the back, which I'm not as concerned about the backs. So that's why this is probably one of the best examples I can show of a really mid-grade and on the low end of the mid-grade example of what I'm looking for to add to my collection. And I got this for a great price, and the eye appeal is just amazing. Can't always do that. I mean, I had to search quite a while for that card. Now here's one I've had again for years, never got it graded, and you'll see why. First off, it's a 1967 Pete Rose. Now, if you look at the centering, so my main criteria is centering. So this has pretty good centering. Corners, I'm not too concerned about. Okay, yeah, there's issues with the corners. Now, there is on the surface, you may not be able to see, there is you maybe just pick it up right there. There is a surface crease right through there. Again, really hard to pick up if you're just looking at it straight. So why would I not want to buy this? Again, this is a raw copy, but if this was a graded copy, well, unless your vision is off, look at the registration on that. The green goes below there. You have the C in the Cincinnati, and there's the line that goes over his cap. The registration, it looks blurry. Again, I probably picked this up maybe when I was a teenager at my local card shop, just to say, hey, I have a 1967 Pete Rose. For all I know, it was like $5 or $10 back in the day, and I was like, hey, that's cool to have an old Pete Rose card. Today, I mean, again, the back, it's not bad. If this card had the registration spot on, and this was maybe graded a 3 or 4, depending on the price, because Pete Rose cards aren't cheap. This may be one that I would consider buying, again, to fit into my budget. Overall, it's not a bad looking card except for the registration. So that would be one that I would do a hard pass on today. Here's another card I've had in my collection for a long, long time, not graded. And here's a good example of where sometimes the surface may be a little bit more important to me than the centering. And that's 1971 Topps. So when you get a dark colored border, these 71 Topps cards, known for chipping, really takes away from the grade and the eye appeal depending on how bad the chipping is. This one, I mean, if you look, I mean, that maybe other than that little corner right there, that is a solid black all around. But it is way off center, too off center for me. That this would not be one that I would consider buying that. That off center is just way too much, but everything else about it is what I'm looking for. The back, as you can see, because it's so off center on the front, it carries on to the back. If it was well centered on the front, I would probably be okay with this back, even though the back is, very, very small border there. Again, depending on the price, if it fits within my budget, and this was centered a little bit better, doesn't have to be perfect for these 71s. This would be one that I would want to buy, new for my collection. All right, another 71 example that is really hard to find centered is the 71 Thurman Munson. The reason why I picked this one out is this is notorious for being off center, left to right. And while not perfect, it's darn close. And for a 5, the other main thing is now maybe at the top here, you have a little bit of that breaking of the black there on the edges or top, but it is so minimal. Maybe a little bit there as well. Again, for a 5, it's not going to be perfect. But I think with this copy here, I eliminated most of the things. Corner wear does not bother me on this one, as long as that corner wear doesn't take away the black border. And for the most part, this doesn't. And the back, fairly well centered. In fact, I think in my conversations with the seller, I think he was hoping that this was going to come back a 7 and was a little disappointed that it came back a 5, although it was to my advantage because if it was a 7, I wouldn't have been able to afford it. So overall, nice surface. There's no creases. So again, for a mid-grade copy, this is exactly what I'm looking for. All right, here's another one that I picked up at last year's National. And another card that has issues with the border based on the color of the border. It's the 1955 Bowman Hank Aaron. So with this wood border, you could easily get some chipping that takes away from the eye appeal and centering. Now this one, left to right, it is almost perfect. And even top to bottom, that bottom border there is really close to being equal to that. So the first thing that I noticed was the centering. Nearly spot on in the centering. The second thing I needed to look for when I was contemplating this card was how are the edges, how's the surface in terms of the corners. Again, a little bit of chipping, very, very minor there, maybe a little bit over there. Again, these 55 Bowmans, you can, in these mid to low grades, you see a lot of chipping. The corners, I don't mind the corners on this. You can see that bottom left corner, which is the corners probably have resulted in the main aspect of that getting a 4. Really, rounded there. You can see some loss in the wood border there. There as well, if you look at it really close, I mean, I'm going to try to get it on the camera here. Hopefully it'll work. There. All right, you can see some imperfections in that corner, not too bad. Same there, a little bit of loss, but overall, that has great eye appeal, but there are obviously some issues. The back, not that bad, a little, maybe slightly off center, maybe pushed in that corner a little bit, that top border, pretty thin. But overall, very happy to add this one. Again, another good example of what I'm looking for, again, for my collection. Here's one here I bought, again, maybe about 7 years ago, something like that, from my local card shop. Have some regrets in buying it, even though the grade is not too bad. Again, it's in a Beckett holder, but it's the 1965 Topps Pete Rose. Now this got a 6, most likely because of the surface. No surface issues, no creases. The corners are fairly sharp, but the left to right centering, again, probably would not buy this again if given an opportunity, especially in a 6. For a 6, I would want the card to be almost perfect centering and have the 6 be because of other issues like the corners. The back, not that bad actually. I mean, that is a fairly clean back. Would be happy with that back any day of the week. But that left to right centering on the front, yeah, not the best copy for my collection. But again, I don't want you to get the impression that I hate some of these cards. I'm grateful to have a 65 Pete Rose. I'm just saying that buying new right now, I would not buy that one new. Am I happy to have it in my collection now? Yes. But that's just because I have it, and the thought of selling it and trying to get another copy and all that stuff, I'm okay with it. All right, 2 more to go as an example here. Here's one, a very low grade 56 Topps Hank Aaron in a PSA 3. Now, the first thing that drew my attention to this card again was the centering. Second was the surface. You see a lot of these cards where there's a little bit of snowing over Aaron's face. Maybe some chipping on the surface or something like that near the umpire or him sliding. Usually that center part of the card, for whatever reason, tends to have some issues for this card. But overall, no creases that I can see. There is a little bit of a indentation there in the border. Okay, so if you want to look at the issues of the edges, this got dinged for the edges, even right there. Again, this is a 3, so there's going to be some problems with the card, and I realize that. But the centering is spot on in my eyes. The general surface, the picture, the image quality is spot on. So right there, I'm pretty much sold on this card because I don't care about the corners or the edges, especially with it being a white border. And the back, not much to complain with. You may see maybe a little bit of staining there, maybe some gum stain or something, again, which maybe had something to do with it being a 3. But overall, again, very, very, very happy. Again, this is for a 3. I'll take this every day because that is to me, that is a great looking example for my collection. Now, the last one, and this is one that, again, it's sometimes hard, and I'm sometimes leery to buy a card on eBay when they only have a picture of the front of the card. Again, the back is not as important to me, so this is why I'm okay with having this card in my collection. It's the 1979 Topps Dave Winfield. And if you know anything about 79 Topps cards, especially the Dave Winfield, notoriously for diamond cut or off centering, it's really, really hard to find a well-centered Dave Winfield from 79 Topps, or that may have some ink splotches. That there's a lot of issues with this Dave Winfield card. So this one is in a 7. And what drew my attention, obviously, was there's still maybe a little bit of a diamond cut to it, but generally speaking, well-centered. There's maybe a little bit of a surface issue there. I don't know if it was on the listing. I didn't notice it, that I thought it was maybe part of the image. But looking at other copies, maybe there's some issue with the ink there. But overall, the front of the card has a very good eye appeal. So that's why I jumped on this, especially for the price that I got it for compared to other 7s. What I didn't see in this listing was a picture of the back. And at first, when I got it, I was disappointed because look how off-center. I mean, that is, you can barely see a little bit, I mean, a tiny sliver of the edge there, and it's completely gone by the time you get up here. And look how thick that border is. At first, I was disappointed with this purchase. But then again, I told myself, look, for the price I got it for, what other 7s are going for, the fact is this still got graded a 7. I go, although numbers really don't matter to me. I'm not sold on the grade. It's by the card, not the grade. The front of the card has very good eye appeal to me. That's what I look at more often. So this is one where I'm okay. If I had a chance to buy it again for the price I did, knowing what other ones go for and how hard it is to find one in decent condition, I wanted to try to get for 79 Topps, no less than sevens, just for what I wanted to go for. This was a really good choice for me to buy, and I don't mind the back as well. So there you go. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of an insight on what I look for. Again, it's not an exact science. There's sometimes surface trumps centering, centering trumps surface, edges, corners. Usually, as you can tell here, the main thing is I don't show a card and the first thing I say is look at those sharp corners. So obviously corners are down on the list, edges are down on the list. It's a matter of centering, surface, general eye appeal to me. So hope you found this helpful. Would like to know whether you have different criteria. Maybe you don't care about centering at all and you want to find cards that have really sharp corners and, you know, nothing wrong with the surface, but you'll take one that is way off center. And yeah, would love to know if that's your criteria that you want for your collection. So that's all I have for you. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.